Hello again, friends. This is Alfred Einstein coming to you once again from the beautiful Specialized Pockets of Knowledge studios. In today's video, I'll give some insight to sellers regarding some ideas I have to help them better understand and sometimes even go on the offensive when selling properties, particularly to investors. And I gotta tell you, the name of this video, Wholesale Buyers Will Despise Me for Making This Video, fits perfectly. With that said, let's get right into it, shall we? In real estate, my 4 real estate offices closed over 1,900 transactions. During the investment period of my life, I corporately purchased and sold over 2,500 properties at auctions throughout the state of Florida. Here are some of the more important items I've learned to aid the seller's side of the transaction. Some of my ideas have a little bite in them, and you won't be able to get them all into special clauses. But at least you'll be more aware of them, and who knows, you might get 1 or 2 into your next contract.
What?
Closing agent identity. This is usual and customary. In other words, the party that gets to choose this is based on the way it's done in the county. And it varies, at least in Florida, from county to county. Once the closing agent is identified, you need to make sure that the contract includes their name, address, phone number, contact person, and email. Occupancy date. Most of the time, occupancy goes hand in hand with a closing. However, sometimes the buyer has a need to occupy prior to the closing. Never do this.
Get out! Don't look at me! Get out!
For more on this topic, please see our video titled The Danger of Early Occupancy. Next up, the closing date. So the closing date is quickly approaching and there appears to be a delay which is being caused by somebody on the other side. Don't extend the closing date without receiving something for the trouble. Please see our video, The 9 Truths of Real Estate Negotiations, or something like that. So the closing looks like it may not happen on time. What you need to do is consider charging a fee to extend the closing date because this event happens more often than not. Whenever you're selling to an investor, it might be prudent to consider charging a fee to extend the closing date. Of course, you'll have to include this in the addendum and it has to be signed by everybody. But it's an important feature. Even if this clause is stricken out by the buyer, it gives you some leverage with regard to other parts of the contract and other negotiations you might enter into. Back in the day, when we had the fee included in our addendum to sell to investors, we used to charge 1% of the purchase price, and that 1% needed to be paid before the contract expired. The extension fee also was paid directly to the closing agent. Your desire to charge a fee as well as other details of this part of the transaction must be in the addendum. And speaking of addendums, always use an addendum to clarify your wishes. An addendum is attached and made part of the sales contract. Make sure you consider using the addendum, especially if the contract that was presented to you by the buyer has not been approved by your state's bar association. Any disputes between the printed contract and the printed or handwritten addendum, the addendum will control. Inspection period adjustments. The normal inspection period is usually between 3 and 5 days. The shorter time for inspections puts more pressure on the buyer. I would suggest that you also use negative notice with regard to the end of the inspection period. What that means is you put the onus on the buyer to notify you if the property did not pass inspection. So use negative notice. That way you don't have to do anything. And the great thing about this negative notice clause is that the buyer's got to notify you, and if they don't, the deposit still goes hard. Also, sellers must insist that the results of the inspections must be made known to you. And the way they do this is in the form of copies of all inspection reports. Personal property. Consider using this clause in your addendum. There is no personal property included in the sale of the property. What this does is it protects the seller from any appliance repairs that the buyers may look to the seller to provide. If no personal property is included, then the seller has no responsibility or liability.
Ew! Ew, man! Ew! if you don't get them big jungle rot alligator feet off mine, man. You can snatch a salmon going upstream with them eagle's claws.
Understand these normal contingencies. Inspection contingency. What that means is during the inspection period, if the property is not acceptable for any reason, the buyer can walk away and receive his deposit back. Financing contingency. This means that the buyer must be able to obtain financing within a specific number of days. If he cannot obtain financing, then all deposits are returned to the buyer and the contract is null and void. Appraisal contingency. This means that when the buyer makes application for a mortgage, that the property must appraise for a certain number, usually the purchase price. If it doesn't, all deposits are returned to the buyer and the contract is null and void. I say normal contingencies because these clauses will no doubt be a part of any standard contract between a buyer and a seller. Because I often entered into contract negotiations with investors, I learned to be a little on the tough side with them. For example, I insisted that the investor's deposit was large and went hard immediately after the expiration of the inspection period. When I sold to investors, there was no financing or appraisal contingencies. However, you can feel free to soften up a little bit when you're dealing with end-using owner-occupants. Even we did. I want you to remove all weasel clauses and moves, or at least try to get paid for them. Here are a few typical weasel clauses made famous by wholesale investors. Partner's approval. This contract is contingent upon my partner taking a look at the house and making sure it meets his approval. Be careful that that period of time, if you allow it, isn't open-ended and doesn't run forever. Same thing with lender's approval. When you're selling to an investor, there should not be any financing contingencies. So he's just going to bring his hard money lender to take a look and see what they think. Again, make sure it's not open-ended and make sure it's a tight date. Give them 2 or 3 days, then it's done. Egregious inspection period. Your inspection period should last 3 to 5 days. If they want to have more than 5 days for their inspections, pass and go someplace else. They're dragging you through the dirt, and what they're going to do is they're going to try to get this contract signed and then sell it to somebody else. Extensive seller repair liability. Normal liability for a seller should be between 2 and 3%. Try not to let them push you past that, unless of course your motivations supersede the need to maintain a low liability. Just go ahead and do it. Small deposits. Wholesalers are famous for coming in with $100 deposits. As a matter of fact, that's what I teach. But you have to be aware that that $100 deposit is all they've got up. And if the deal doesn't go together, they can walk away and you'll get the $100. Extended closing dates. Contracts where the closing date is extended beyond 15, 20 days, it kind of gets a little ridiculous and it looks like they're trying to buy time. If it doesn't bother you that they extend the closing date because you have other things that you have to take care of, that's fine. But just be aware of extended closing dates and the problems that they have the potential to cause. Is the contract assignable? Most likely, if you're selling to an investor, they're going to ask that the contract be assignable. For many, many reasons, it's well within their business plan, it's within their rights, and there's really no harm to you as long as the main contract is still abided by. Repairs and seller limitations. Who will be responsible for any lender-required repairs? When you're dealing with investors, it's got to be them. When you're dealing with a buyer that's an end user that might be buying FHA, you got to consider that they don't have any money or they have very limited money. There also might be some restrictions placed on their use of money from the mortgage guy. So who's going to be responsible for any lender-required repairs? You need to address this. Sometimes, especially in Florida, the buyer is going to want a 4-point inspection outside of the inspection period. Make sure they pay for that themselves, as well as make sure they pay for the repairs, if any, that the 4-point inspection identifies. Deposit types. Hard deposits mean that they are not refundable to the buyer if the deal fails to close. Soft deposit means the buyer can get their deposit back if one or more of the conditions under the contract has not or cannot be met within a given time period. As a seller, you would like, but in most cases won't get, hard deposits until all the contingencies are cleared or met. Deposit amounts. The larger the initial deposit, the stronger the offer. The reverse can also be said about a $100 deposit. Here's the last tip. It's definitely the most important one to understand because it can either help you or definitely hurt you. And before I give it to you, please take a moment to activate the YouTube notifications by liking, subscribing, and clicking the little bell so we can notify you when our newest videos are published. Okay, here it is. The passing of time. Business days or calendar days. Calendar days are regular days, while banking days are only weekdays where holidays don't fall. So here's an example of the big time swing. 21 days in calendar time is 21 days. 21 days in banking time is 30 days, and that's if there's no holidays. So during contract negotiations, insist on which calculation of time would benefit you the most.
All right, let's get it over with.
Well, that's it for today. Remember to visit your local Real Estate Investor Club meetings. You'll be able to make contacts and learn a lot about real estate investment. Also, please help us to improve our content by commenting in the section below. I promise to get back to each and every one of you. Until next time, this is Alfred Einstein saying good day.